I just wondered what you think you're doing out here and who you think you're helping.
Great question. One of the people in your administration walked by yesterday, and a faculty member who was out here said to this person rather high up in your administration, "What do you think about what this guy's talking about out here?" And the gentleman in your administration said, "Oh, he's just probably out here proselytizing." This faculty member looked at the member of your administration and said, "Well, I'm really excited. He's helping teach our students how to think." So the reason that we're holding this dialogue is to deal with some of the deeper issues in life, like where do I come from, why am I here, how do I live my life ethically, and is there life after death or not?
We have professors, some of the best professors in the world to teach us.
And they're much better than I am.
I know. That's why I'm wondering why you're here.
Well, you know what the real question is?
Why am I here?
Very good. Now you're thinking.
Oh,
not only why are you here, but why are all these other people here?
All right. Okay. So, you think that Christianity, your religion, what you're preaching is the right way, is the only way, right?
Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." That's what Jesus said.
You do realize we're in a war right now. In a war, and religious fundamentalism is at the root of this war.
You got to be kidding me. You actually think religious fundamentalism is motivating the United States to be at war?
I mean, that's not exactly what I said. I'm saying the war in general.
Do you honestly think that America is motivated by religious fundamentalism to be involved in our war?
Well, see, you're just spinning the words I said. That wasn't what I'm saying at all.
Well, then why don't you be a little more clear and express yourself more clearly?
I'm saying there's people halfway around the world that are saying that their way is the one right way. And there's people all over the world that think that their religion is the one right religion, the one right religion. This divisiveness has caused pretty much all the violence in our world today. And so I'm just wondering what you think you're helping. Because, I mean, there's people that think they're the one right way, and there's, you that think you're, preaching the one right way. But I'm just wondering what you really think is going to be resolved by you coming out here and disrupting us while we're walking to class and I'm walking to work. And I mean, I just want to know. I just want
you bet.
I want to know what you think what you're really doing to help the problem at all.
I am convinced to the root of my being that the solution for war, divorce, hatred, bigotry, sexism is the peace that God gives us when we enter a relationship with Him. And I can promise you, sir, if you will read the Gospels and look at Jesus Christ, as He bleeds and dies on a cross, how does He respond to His enemies? Not, "I hate you," not, "I'm going to stick it to you." Instead, Jesus prays, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." When you put your faith in Jesus Christ, He does not lead you into war, into hatred. He leads you to be a peacemaker and to love even your enemy. And when Dr. Martin Luther King went into Birmingham, Alabama to promote civil rights, he did not look into the faces of those white Christian racists and say, "You know something, guys, you need to realize that all religion is the same." Instead, he said, "You followers of Christ need to take Christ more seriously, and you need to commit your life to Jesus Christ to the point where you realize that your racism is evil, because Christ clearly taught that racism is evil."
Right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I just don't see how you think that you're helping spread peace at all by being out here. I mean, I agree that Jesus, was a very peaceful man, of course, but I just don't see why you think that this is what is going to help the world or help any. I mean, why aren't you doing charitable works? They're trying to promote peace in different countries. We're a peaceful community here at the University of Texas. I mean,
really? Do any of you come from divorced homes?
Of course.
Do any of you have a real challenge forgiving people who hurt you? Do any of you struggle with hatred, with racist attitudes? Do any of you struggle with lust and dehumanizing people? Well, maybe you're perfect.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Neither am I. That is why I'm convinced all of us need Jesus Christ. I certainly do, because I'm not perfect. And I can promise you, I hurt with many of the students here whose mom and dad couldn't love each other. Found it impossible. So they had to divorce.
So what about the other people that don't believe what you believe? I mean, what do you think happens to them? What do you think Christ would have wanted for people that were raised to believe something different, or in what could be characterized as a different God, or I mean, basically the same God but worshipped in a different way? I mean, do you honestly believe that that Jesus Christ is one true way? What happens to the other people? What happens to the rest of the world?
Well, obviously, I'm just the mailman. I didn't make up Jesus, right? Jesus lived 2,000 years ago, long before I was ever born. So I'm just delivering Jesus' mail. And what Jesus said in John 3:16-18 is, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already, because he's not believed in the name of God's one and only Son." So that's what Jesus said.
Jesus didn't really write that down, though. I mean,
No, you're right. He didn't write it down. Those who heard him wrote it down.
how many years later?
The Gospels are written between 20 and 60 years after Christ.
Okay, well, I appreciate that you don't have a sign being prejudiced against anybody and stuff. I was just wondering basically what your purpose was here and what you felt like you were doing. But I respect the fact that you're talking to people. Thanks.
What do you think of Christ?
I think he was probably an awesome guy.
Well, if he was an awesome guy, how do you handle him claiming to be God in human form? How do you handle him claiming that he died on a cross for your sin to forgive you and give you a gift of eternal life? How do you handle that?
I don't know if he really claimed all that. I mean, he didn't write the Bible. The Bible was written a long time after by man. Not the Son of God, not God, but by man.
I'm real glad it was written by man.
So I don't really take a literal interpretation of the Bible. I mean,
well, how do you know he was a great guy?
Just from what I read and what I like to think about him, you know.
Yeah. Well, the same literature that talks about him being a great guy talks about him claiming to be God.
Okay.
So
a lot of people didn't like that when he said that. I heard too.
Exactly right. They nailed him for it, didn't they?
Yeah.
Right. So, how do you determine when you read the eyewitness account what's true and what's false? Because you obviously accept he was a great guy from the Gospels, but then you just can't handle the idea that he claimed to be God. So, I mean, how do you accept part of it and reject the other part of it? You know, what tests do you use, or what do you do? What process do you go through?
I mean, I don't use any tests with it. I don't. I mean, like I said, I'm not a religious person. I haven't read the Bible. I don't know. I mean, I know that he didn't write it himself, so I take pretty much all of it with, as they would say, a grain of salt, I guess. That's how I would look at religion in general.
Okay, but you have a worldview.
Of course.
Right. You answer the question, you know, what's my meaning in life? What's my purpose? How am I going to treat people ethically? And what about death or life after death? So what's the worldview that you embrace? In other words, who or what have you put your faith in?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a person that feels like morality has to come from religion. You know, I believe in the golden rule and accepting people for what they are, you know, and, you know, respecting people until they disrespect you, and that's pretty much it, you know. That's
Okay, why do you believe in the golden rule?
Well, I mean, just out of convenience sake, initially, if you do unto others what you would want them to do to you, then everything's going to go a little bit smoother. I mean, it makes sense on a moral level, on a logical level. Yeah.
Okay, now in light of the fact that it was Jesus who said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," doesn't that give him some credibility in your view?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that is. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Jesus was uncredible. I'm saying your argument, this conversation out here, is not helping anybody. It's not helping. It's not helping us. It's not helping. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to like attack Jesus. You're trying to spin me to make it to where I'm saying like an anti-Christian statement or an some sort of anti-Jesus statement.
No, you just say whatever you want to say. I'm not trying to spin you or anything. I'm trying to genuinely ask you, what do you believe? What are you living for? And what's the evidence in what you're living for is true?
I'm not a religious person. I haven't read the Bible. I don't know. I mean, I know that he didn't write it himself, so I take pretty much all of it with, as they would say, a grain of salt, I guess. That's how I would look at religion in general.
Okay, but you have a worldview.
Of course.
Right, you answer the question, you know, what's my meaning in life? What's my purpose? How am I going to treat people ethically? And what about death or life after death? So what's the worldview that you embrace? In other words, who or what have you put your faith in?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not a person that feels like morality has to come from religion. You know, I believe in the golden rule and accepting people for what they are, you know, and, you know, respecting people until they disrespect you, and that's pretty much it, you know?
Okay, why do you believe in the golden rule?
Well, I mean, just out of convenience sake, initially, if you do unto others what you would want them to do to you, then everything's going to go a little bit smoother. I mean, it makes sense on a moral level, on a logical level. Yeah.
Okay, now in light of the fact that it was Jesus who said, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you," doesn't that give him some credibility in your view?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that is. I mean, I'm not trying to say that Jesus was uncredible. I'm saying your argument, this conversation out here, is not helping anybody. It's not helping. It's not helping us. It's not helping. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to like attack Jesus. You're trying to spin me to make it to where I'm saying like an anti-Christian statement or an
No, I'm not.
some sort of anti-Jesus statement.
No, you just say whatever you want to say. I'm not trying to spin you or anything. I'm trying to genuinely ask you, what do you believe? What are you living for? And what's the evidence that what you're living for is true?
I mean, really, I like to embrace the mystery of life, you know? I have lots of friends from different religions, you know, and I take the idea that there is no one true religion. I take the stance that I'm sure Jesus, as the man that he was written to be, would not condemn anybody for what they believe in. I mean, as long as they were peaceful and friendly to their fellow man, like, I mean, what do I believe in? I don't know. I don't know where we came from. No one knows. I'm not going to know what happens after I die until I die. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I just got to live as well as I can while I'm here, you know?
Okay.
I feel like religion tries to answer sometimes questions that can't be answered, you know?
Good.
If you look at a tribal religion or something, or some peoples before Christianity, or that have never been taught Christianity unless they were, you know, manipulated to believe in Christianity, people try to answer questions that there's not necessarily, where do we come from? What happens after we die? My wife just died. What is going to happen now? You know, and so they pray. People first prayed, you know, sun gods, nature gods, trying to get crops and stuff. And I'm just saying, I don't think I'm not saying one religion is any better, any worse than any other. I'm saying the conversation, the divisiveness that comes from that sort of attitude is one of the reasons why our world is messed up today. And I'm saying your conversation, the arguments you've been having all week over here, I don't really know what it's like helping, you know? I don't really know who it's helping. Like, that's all I have to say.
All right, well, you know, you've made some truth statements, haven't you?
I hope so. I mean, it's hard for me. I think all these good things to say, and then once I get up here, I get kind of riled up, and I don't say is what's exactly coming off what I'm actually should be saying, and then you spin it to make me sound like an idiot, so it's tough, you know? You're used to this stuff, you know?
I haven't spun anything, sir. I'm listening to what you say, and I respond based on what you say.
Okay.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've heard you say is, you know, tribal people just sort of believe in their certain religion. Some people believe because it's been forced upon them, you know, through colonization or imperialism.
Unfortunately.
Right. So these poor people are rather ignorant. But what you've come to realize is the truth. And the truth is that it really doesn't matter what you believe when it comes to religion. Have you said that or not?
No, I don't think.
Okay, I'm sorry. What did you say?
That's what you've taken from it.
Well, please correct me.
I've said what I said. I'm not going to correct you. I said what I said. What you can take from it is what you can take. What everyone else that's been saying.
Did you not say that it really doesn't matter what religion you are? They're all the same, and that all religion is basically based in ignorance.
I said that no religion was better than any other religion, or worse,
right?
And that the divisiveness that comes from the thinking that your religion is the right religion is one of the reasons why the world is messed up today. That's word for word what I said.
Some religions
you can take that how you want.
I think it's rather clear what you're saying if you think about the logical ramifications of what you're saying.
And you're spinning all these words that I haven't even said.
Yes, you did. You talked very clearly about people don't know about it, but it's forced on them.
I'm saying in general, it's hard to know what's going to happen or where we came from unless it's a leap. You can't argue science, you can't argue logic versus faith because it's a leap of faith. It's outside of reason technically in that sense as far as like where we came from or where we're going.
Yes, and you have faith also. You expressed that faith when you said and all religions are essentially the same. That's a faith statement. You don't know that.
I didn't say that. I said no religion is better or worse than any
Fine,
other.
no religion is better or worse.
There's one true right religion. It's the divisiveness that comes from that is one of the reasons why the world has problems consistently since humans have been here. I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but some religions say there are many gods. Jesus Christ says there's one God. Religions say work your way to heaven. Jesus says you can't work your way to heaven. It's a gift that God gives you by His grace. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha never talked once about God, so the existence of God is totally irrelevant to Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Obviously, Muhammad and Jesus taught that there is a God. So they're obviously contradicting each other, which means they can't all be the same. Either they're all wrong or one of them's right, because they all make truth claims.
Well, see, and this is exactly the attitude that I'm talking about, the divisiveness that comes from thinking that your one religion is the right way.
Yeah, but what it sounds like to me is that you have a truth claim out here.
You're putting down Buddhism because they don't assign an actual God to something. So you're saying that is obviously an inferior religion to what yours is. What other religions do you want to put down as worse than what you believe? What other gods do you want to put down as not as good as your God? Because that's what I'm basically getting when I hear you talk.
I'm not putting down any religion. I am raising the question of truth, reality.
Yeah,
There cannot be no God and a God at the same time. That's a contradiction. So when you make the statement that all religions are essentially equal, how can you believe that in light of the fact they contradict each other? Is not what you're really saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, there really is no God. These different religions come up, but they're all fantasies. They're all wrong, because in reality there's no God. Or are you saying there is a God, but this God is impersonal, which means this God really doesn't care what you think about God. You can think that God's a white male. You can think that there are many gods. You can think that God is a female. God doesn't care what you think about it. So what are you saying when you say all these contradictory religions are all equal? What do you mean by that?
I'm just saying the religion that you're promoting or whatever you're trying to promote here, there's people in other countries, in other parts of the world that are saying that their one religion is the right way, and their God is the God, and that divisiveness that comes from that sort of attitude gets people nowhere. It gets nowhere.
So what I hear you saying is, all the people in all the world religions are wrong. You are right. All religions are the same. You've said it over and over again.
You're part of the problem, not part of the solution, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Religious fundamentalism.
Well, fine, all right. You can make all the personal attacks you want, but still, the question, no, I am pointing out the inconsistency of acting like, if I say all religions are the same, that I'm not making a truth claim that contradicts the majority of people on the planet. You've got to understand, when you stand there and say, all religions are the same, are equal, you are contradicting the Muslim, the Jew, the Buddhist, the Hindu, the Christian, which is fine. You have every right to do that. I respect your right to do that.
Well, see, what you're doing.
But what you've got to realize is you're making your own truth claim. And that truth claim that you're making is a statement that either God does not exist, which means all religions are equal, meaning by that all religions are fantasies that people just construct, or if there is a God, he's just an impersonal force, and God doesn't care what you think of him. You can think that he's a 6'1" white male. You can think God is a power. You can think God is electricity. It doesn't matter.
Could possibly be alienated from him if you never actually get to know him in the first place?
Great question. This woman asks, how is it possible to be alienated from God if I've never known God? Sounds like a paradox, an oxymoron to me. Jesus and the Bible insist that no atheist has a legitimate excuse. The only reason an atheist does not find God is for the same reason that a criminal does not find the police. He's running away. Why? The order and design of nature, the order and design of the human body demands an intelligent mind, demands a creator. Secondly, the inner moral law that all of us human beings have demands a moral lawgiver. And that's why Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, although they knew God, they neither glorified God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Nobody has a legitimate reason to say, I'm sorry, I can't believe God exists. Because God has left so much evidence of his existence, you have to intentionally run away from it. All of us have violated our consciences. We all experience guilt. Well, what is guilt? Guilt is God's alarm system. Wake up, smell the coffee you've done wrong, come back. And Christ bled and died on a cross to forgive us, to wipe away our guilt, and to give us freedom in life. Have I answered your question?
I think so. At the same time, you have to address the question of how, if we're inbuilt with logic, human logic, for example, to always go back to the Creator, and yet a lot of logic actually ends up pointing us away from it, points us towards, validifying things of this world. Well, how is that possible that God would have put that kind of logic in us to be kind of changed for that kind of purpose?
Fascinating question. There are some people who view God as an all-powerful being who guarantees that his will is done 100% of the time. I am not one of those people. I am convinced that Jesus Christ and the Bible reveal that God does not want to dominate you. He wants to share with you. God does not want to overrule you. He wants to interact with you. Obviously, what I'm getting at is free will. Because God is love, a loving being, God created you and me to interact in love with him. And that demands free will. So, logically, I have no right to be atheist or agnostic. Logically, the evidence is God exists. Now, I can take logic and twist it to the point where I think I'm rationalizing running away from God, but that doesn't really work. A classic example of this is Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell was a brilliant atheist philosopher who wrote a book called Why I Am Not a Christian. And his problem with Jesus Christ is Jesus cursing the fig tree. And he says Christ lost his temper. That's a sin. Give me a break. Bertrand Russell wrote an awful lot of philosophy on paper that he got from trees. And there's nothing wrong with that. And Christ obviously used a fig tree as an object lesson to teach his disciples a lesson. And yet the brilliant philosopher, Bertrand Russell, in his book, Why I'm Not a Christian, can use that kind of logic to justify rejecting Christ. That's twisted logic. That's very sad. Now, obviously logic has its limits. Logic is important, and obviously I use logic in the way I dialogue with you. So logic is very important, but we better acknowledge that there are limits to logic. Logically, I can't walk through that door because I always go half the distance between where I am now and the door, and then half the distance, and then half the distance, and then half the distance. So logic has its limits. But obviously, logic is very important. Reason is very important.
You said that when God created us, he limited his power by giving us what you call free will.
Correct.
But it doesn't, in the mind doesn't accept for a creator to have limited power. Can you agree with that?
No.
No. Completely disregarding what Jesus said.
No.
When you honestly believe that the human, the innate thoughts, when it comes to what is a creator, they will come up in their head and say, the creator has limited power, the creator has limited knowledge.
That's not what I said. It is possible for an all-powerful God to partially limit his power by creating us free.
But that doesn't mean all powerful.
If you disagree with the definition, fine. I respect your right to disagree with the definition.
Okay, so then we'll take
but what
it
I'm
somewhere
saying
else.
is,
We'll take it somewhere
what
else.
Jesus insisted is, God is all powerful, which means his will shall win in the end. But he's partially limited his power by giving us a free will. That's why if I go up to this gentleman, haul back, and send my fist towards his handsome face, God is not going to automatically put plexiglass in between and I bounce off the plexiglass. He's given me a free will. He's given me a hand. I can give the man money to feed him lunch, or I can roll it into a fist and send it crashing into his handsome face. Okay. I can do either. Can't you?
Yeah, I can hit him if I choose.
But do you honestly think it's God's will for you to hit him?
Absolutely. When we had this discussion before, you said you have free will and you can make the choice to hit him or not hit him, but by free will, you're completely disregarding the option of a limited will, And I asked you before, if you have this free will, you can fly like a bird, you can make the sun come from the west, but you don't have this ability. God did not will for you
Those are
to have
physical
this ability.
limitations you're talking about. You have switched from free will to the limits of gravity.
Not
You're right,
gravity.
I cannot fly through the air because gravity holds me to the ground and I don't have wings like a bird. And I'm not an airplane or a jet. I'm a human being, I don't have the ability to fly. That says nothing about free will. It says a lot about physical limitations.
Which you don't consider to be created by God? So now you're completely...
Of course I believe that's created by God. Gravity's created by God. I am created by God without wings, therefore I cannot fly.
Okay, so when these physical limitations are created by God, isn't it God's will to not create you with wings and to create this thing you call gravity that keeps you on the ground? It's God's will. That's God willed to create these things.
That's correct.
So God also willed for you to not have the ability to do these things. Correct.
Correct.
Yes, correct. So you, with this free will, are now limited by God's will.
Obviously there are limits.
Obviously, your will is limited by the will of God. Completely disregarding, for you just agreed to that.
No.
You just said it.
No, we were talking about physical limits.
That are created
and then we talked
by
about
the will of
a
God.
will that all of us have that enables us to love or to hate, to do good
Still limited
or to do
by
evil.
the will of God. Subject to the will of God.
But God has chosen to give us a precious gift of a
okay.
rational mind and free will.
Okay,
Now
so
He
when
holds
you-
us responsible for how we use those gifts. If I abuse children, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment.
Absolutely.
If I murder, I will have to answer to God on a day of judgment. But I am free to be a Mother Teresa II or to be an Adolf Hitler II. I have to choose. I have to make up my life. Guys, you don't have to study for your next exam.
When you say
you can just
choose-
party, party, party. But then you'll flunk, flunk, flunk. And if you go to your professor and say, "How could you flunk me?" He's going to say, "I'm sorry, you answered incorrectly. You flunked." Part of having a free will means you understand there are consequences to my decisions. And I have to learn to live with the consequences of my decision to party, 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 because then I'll flunk, flunk, flunk. That's part of growing up and being an adult.
So can we say that God willed for the existence of time?
God created time.
God created time, and He existed before the creation of time.
Correct.
Okay. He is not subject or bound to time.
Correct.
So when you say that God chose to give us free will, you're saying at some point He didn't give us free will. At another point, He gave us free will. All occurrences in time that God is not subject to.
That would be just as illogical as if I were to say, because God is eternal, God never created human life initially.
No.
That is
No.
baloney. Just because God is eternal does not mean
No.
that we have always existed. Human beings are the creation of God at a point in human history. Scientific evidence is that thousands of years ago, human life began. About 5 billion years ago, the earth began. Because God is eternal does not mean that we have always existed. Human beings are the creation of God at a point in human history. Scientific evidence is that thousands of years ago, human life began. About 5 billion years ago, the earth began. About 15 billion years ago, the universe began. 20 billion years ago, did God know that He was going to create us? Yes. But just because God knew that He was going to create us did not mean that we existed.
Absolutely.
We didn't exist until God chose to create us. Similarly, when God chose to create us, He chose to give us a free will because He created us to love Him and to love each other. And in order to love, you've got to be free.
But you're attributing change to God, whereas the change that actually happens when a creation is created is a change in that thing. When you say that He decided to do this, He chose to do this, you're saying that there's a change that happens in the self of God that's subject to time, and we already agreed that God existed before the creation of time, and He's not bound or subject to it.
Okay, according to your belief system, who did God love before God created angels and human beings?
This attribute that you call love, you're going to have to define that, because that's not one of the attributes that comes innate in the human being to the existence of God.
Do you believe that God loves?
I don't know what you mean by love. Will I attribute the word uhibbullah? Absolutely, that's written in the Quran. But this attribute of love, you're going to have to define what that means for me.
To love means to actively wish the well-being of someone else. God actively wishes our well-being, Jesus insisted.
But then
that's why he died on a cross to forgive us and to give us life, because he actively wishes our well-being.
That's your excuse when you use that term, God loves everything. That's your excuse to completely disregard God willing for all evil to happen.
You believe God wills murder. I am convinced God does not will murder. God hates murder.
But will
you believe that God wills an adult to abuse a little child.
Attributes.
I am convinced God hates it when an adult abuses a little child.
Okay, I'll agree with you. God ordered us not to murder and not to hate each other and not to commit adultery and not to abuse children. These are things that we were ordered not to do. But God still willed for people to do those things so that we would know what not to do. God willed.
I disagree. And I think Jesus Christ clearly disagrees.
So then
God does not will that I murder so that these people here can say, now I know that murder's wrong.
So then where...
You are being given a mind by God and a conscience. You do not need to see the murder of a human being in order to know murder is wrong. You do not need to see a woman raped in order to know rape is wrong. Why? Because God has given you a rational mind and a conscience.
You can't create your own ethical system?
Well, yeah.
You're saying that you cannot create it, like, without any God present. You're saying I don't have the ability to create it if there's a God. All right.
Okay, good question. You're absolutely right. If there is no God, I can create my own ethical system. But mine is not right? Mine is my own creation. And the Nazi is not wrong, it's their own creation. And the white racist is not wrong, it's their own creation. And the rapist is not wrong, because ethics is the creation of human mind, which means it's all relative. Okay, so you can't live that out.
Those are possibly coincidences. I mean, and probably most of them have not known Christianity. So, you know, there's something that drives those things, and which is more of a survival of society thing, which is not really related to religion. They made their own ethical systems, and they seem to have something in common, so it's not just random, so, as you would claim.
Right. But, sir, the question that we're addressing right now is not Christianity. The question we're addressing now is atheism and theism.
Oh,
Jesus Christ is a totally different issue.
Well,
but now, the question that we have to ask is, doesn't the evidence point to some type of God existing? And obviously I'm saying human experience, which is we have a conscience that ties us into, maybe not many, but at least a few moral absolutes, like adultery is wrong, murder is wrong, abusing an innocent child is absolutely wrong. Those moral absolutes demand a mind prior to the human mind that creates and defines the value of justice. Because if there's no mind prior to the human mind, then obviously, as you point out, it's the human mind that creates it. Which means the rapist creates his own ethics, Hitler creates his own, Mother Teresa creates her own. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong.
We can define it based on the human being as a species, as a consciousness. As in, when I'm hurting you, if I can put myself in your shoes, then in reality I'm also hurting myself. So we can define ourselves as a species and call that its own definition.
Sure.
Whereas the Nazi is so caught in his viewpoint that he can't actually, move out to another viewpoint to experience what he's doing to someone else.
But none of us can. Because we all are confined by our culture. We're all confined by our environment, right?
That's what empathy is, though. And I believe empathy is a word because we are, in some respect, able to do that.
Good. And what I'm saying is, empathy, true empathy, is a clear sign that we're not just machines. We have a free will. We have a conscience that enables us to understand that is really evil. That is really good. I want to do the good instead of the evil. Well, that demands a worldview where there's some type of God, not Jesus Christ. Jesus is not part of this discussion right now, obviously. It's atheism and theism right now, right?
Yeah. Why are we debating this? I'm not sure. I don't know yet. But I have one question.
Yes, sir.
Why do you think that God gave scientific minds to atheists?
Columbia University. I'm out there dialoguing with the students, and suddenly a group of freshmen come up, and they say to me, "Hey, Cliffe, how do you know that your mind was not just put together by a brilliant scientist this morning in a vat, and all the memories that you have were just programmed by a scientist? I mean, how do you know that?" Well, I thought they were jerking me around. I thought they were trying to play games with my head. But they had just come out of humanities, and their professor was honestly struggling through epistemology. Why are you confident that your mind tells you the truth about reality? Now, where did science begin? Science began within the context of a biblical Christian worldview, which says you don't have to struggle with why does your mind put you in touch with reality? Because the basic fundamental starting point is God gave you your mind. It's a rational mind. Therefore, you better do good science because that is the way to get in touch with reality.
Step back to where science began again. Did you say that?
In a Christian worldview, which says there's a creator. I mean, Kepler, Galileo, Copernicus, Newton, all the folks who began modern science.
And Christians persecuted the crap out of those guys. I mean...
Oh, no. Galileo said the Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. All those guys had a profound faith in Jesus Christ. Now, the church made some horrible mistakes, and you're right. The church persecuted Galileo. But I can promise you look at Newton, Kepler, Galileo, they all had profound biblical worldview, faith in Christ. That's where modern science began, within the context of a biblical Christian worldview. Why? Because the Bible says that a rational being, a creator God, gave us rational minds, and we are responsible to think rationally. To think irrationally is sin. Johann Kepler, the father of modern science, as he peered down at the stars at night, exclaimed, "Oh God, I am thinking your thoughts after you." That's good. It's good faith, and it's good science. Who's the head of the Human Genome Project? Francis Collins, right? They mapped all the human genes. Francis Collins has a profound faith in Jesus Christ, and he's obviously one of the most brilliant scientists alive today. There is no contradiction between faith in God and good science. They go together.
Let's, why don't we attack one of the weak points then, and evolution. Can you state your views on that? I'm not sure.
Sure.
What kind of...
When it comes to evolution, you got to divide it into process and origin.
Right.
Evolution as a process is a theory, supported by some evidence. Evolution as an origin is not hard science. Evolution as an origin is a philosophy of science. It's a philosophy that says, behind the process of evolution, there's no intelligent mind, there's simply fate and chance.
A firmly held belief, I assume this is the way that you define your faith, is a firmly held belief, an absolute deep truth that I think you're kind of getting to a point where you base faith on a lack of logic. It's a deep belief without any ground or, as you put it, leg to stand on. So why is faith good?
I make a distinction between gullibility and wise faith. Gullibility is blindly believing without any evidence. I think you and I would be fools to be gullible.
And I kind of look at faith in that same way.
I disagree.
How do you make the distinction between gullibility and what you call wise faith?
Wise faith demands evidence before you trust.
What is your evidence?
For what?
Let's say the evidence of what happened to Jesus Christ, or the bio of Jesus Christ is real. Where's your evidence?
Okay. Where's your evidence that Michigan State is going to grant you a diploma on your day of graduation?
I don't have evidence because that's not something that's set in stone. It's a variable. It could happen, it could not.
Well, then why do you give as much money and work to Michigan State to earn a diploma? Do you just blindly do that, or is there some evidence that Michigan State is a reliable institution of higher learning?
I know that there are people who have done it before me. I know and have explained the process and have engaged in a contract with the university that if I complete that process, I will get that. It's a contract.
Good. So there is evidence. That is the foundation of your faith that on your day of graduation, you're going to be given a diploma.
It's not a faith, it's an agreement.
Sir, that is faith.
Okay.
You cannot prove to me that Michigan State is going to give you a diploma on your day of graduation.
So
you
can
have
you
faith.
prove to me that Jesus Christ was resurrected on the third day? Can you prove to me that he walked on water and performed miracles?
Sir, I can prove to you nothing in life. To prove means to show it cannot be another way.
I agree. I
don't base my life on proof. I base my life on evidence. The evidence is Michigan State will grant you a diploma. That's why I think you're wise to trust Michigan State. The evidence is Jesus Christ is reliable. That's why it's wise to trust him. What is that evidence? The evidence is historical in nature. It's his lifestyle, the way he treated people. It's the content of his ethical teaching, what he taught in the Sermon on the Mount. It's the way he died.
But you have evidence that you're pointing out the good things about the story of his life that doesn't, however, tell you definitively that the story was true. You take Jesus Christ, who was, we all know the story of Jesus Christ. Now let's look at 2,000 years before Jesus Christ, when the Egyptians were writing the bio of Horus, who was born of a virgin, he had 12 disciples, he raised people from the dead, he walked on water, he cured the sick, he was called the healer, the way, he was put to death, and after 3 days he rose from the dead. That's a lot of, in that same light that you bring to Jesus Christ, that's a lot of good evidence about Horus too. That's also a lot of good evidence that the bio of Jesus Christ is not only questionable but also plagiaristic. All these religions have evidence that this has happened. They all have historical record, but where is Jesus trumping all these other ones?
It's very, very simple, sir. When you study Egyptian religion, almost none of it is based on history. It's making a claim to communicate truth through mythology. Fine, that's a possibility. But please don't make the mistake of saying that Osiris, Isis, the others, gods of Egyptian religion are historical, because they're not. And that claim is never made that way. And the way you try to insist that, oh no. The Bible borrows from Egyptian mythology when it says that Jesus rose 3 days later. No, it does not at all borrow from Egyptian mythology.
Or even the 25 other Mediterranean gods that all had the same kind of aspects to their lives. Almost all of them were born to virgins. Several of them were born on the 25th of December.
Well, obviously, Jesus was not born on December 25th, and obviously...
Oh, it certainly wasn't.
Obviously, the only reason we celebrate that is because back in the 4th century, when Christianity became accepted in the Roman Empire, December 25th was chosen because it agreed with other religions.
Paganism.
Yeah, exactly. But so what? I mean, December 25th is not the birth of Christ. It's an agreed upon civil holiday.
Well, yeah, but it matches up. See, that's what I'm saying. She brought up the question of what if, how do we know that the Bible, you can't, you admit, and I appreciate you admitting the fact that you can't prove anything to anyone and such a thing as pseudoscience, but you're bringing about this evidence, and my question still kind of remains, where has the evidence for Jesus Christ trumped any other religion? Because you're also talking about historical evidence here. I want to just to note, there is no third person source that cites or says anything about Jesus Christ, where we have independent sources of information that can collaborate the story of Muhammad. We have independent sources of information that have collaborated the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha's lifetime and kingdom, and yet we have nothing. We have not even Romans kept a record or made any mention of Jesus Christ, and the Romans were meticulous at that. So where is your confounding evidence that builds Jesus Christ above all of these others that are all claiming they have historical evidence?
No,
They're all
they're not.
claiming.
We just established that. Read Egyptian religion. They are not making historical claims.
Okay, take Egyptians out of it. You can take any number of other world religions, and the scenario is the same.
No, it is not. It is not. Muhammad was an historical person, obviously. Siddhartha Gautama Buddha was an historical person, obviously, as was Jesus. But the avatars of Hinduism are not historical people. Okay. And the Egyptian mythological gods are not historical people.
So then how do you put Jesus Christ above Muhammad and Buddha?
All right. You better have some tests that you use to determine whether any document is historically reliable. For myself, I have 4 tests that I use on any document that claims to be historically reliable. My 4 tests are internal consistency, meaning by that, are there contradictions within the text that point to massive confusion on the part of the authors? When you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll notice no contradictions. Different perspectives, but no contradictions. Tremendously internally consistent. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style of the document once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Odd took a boat ride? No. The literary style of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this, he did that. It reads like the New York Times. Third test, archaeological evidence. Are we talking about the island of Atlantis out in the ocean? No. We're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, Rome, archaeologically verifiable places. Fourth test, haven't you ever played the game telephone? You sit in a circle, whisper the secret into the ear of the person next to you, and they whisper it into the ear of the person seated next to them. And by the time the secret reaches the end of the circle, it's been totally perverted. Yes, I've played that game. No, that is not how we have the Gospels today. The Gospels that we have in English today are based on over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript, dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, found from Rome, Italy, down around the Mediterranean to Alexandria, Egypt, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. There is no document from antiquity that can even approach the New Testament Gospels in manuscript evidence. Does that mean it's the Word of God? No, obviously not. Does it point to it being historically reliable? Absolutely yes.
What is your religion? I mean, I assume you're Christian, but
I'm a follower of Jesus Christ.
you have no specific affiliation other than that?
No.
I mean, what about how many times the Bible switched hands? I mean, how the diet of worms and all those big editing sessions done by the Vatican, or anything from Constantinople. What about how many times the Bible has switched hands and been translated? You don't think that, man is fallible, man has greed, so you don't think that man had the opportunity to switch around a few words, or maybe even change the perspectives? You said a second ago, it reads like the New York Times. Plenty of people won't read the New York Times because they don't think that the words are false, but they think it's very misleading. You don't think that's possible in its more than 1,500-year history?
Well, what you have is the authors of the New Testament dying based on their claim that they had seen Jesus Christ risen from the dead. Now, when you watch Catch Me If You Can, you begin to realize that that young man was very, very deceptive. And he posed as a Pan Am pilot, he posed as a doctor in an emergency room, and he posed as a lawyer. The guy played by Leonardo DiCaprio hadn't done any of that. But he lied his way through it. But the point is, he lied in order to benefit himself. The first century followers of Christ who wrote the gospel said, we saw Christ risen from the dead. It didn't benefit them. It led to their martyrdom.
So persecution is verification?
If I claim to have seen something, and you tell me, deny it and live, or else maintain that you did see it and we'll kill you for it, I can promise you, sir, you don't have to be a PhD in psychology to know human beings will crack under that pressure.
Well, yes, but maybe back then they did believe it. If someone back then saw the northern lights, they would be convinced that it was something from God. They have no idea that these are things caused by trapped ions in our magnetosphere. They didn't know that back then. There are plenty of natural phenomena. They had no idea what was going on. And so they more than likely almost always interpreted it as something from God. And yet what I'm saying is maybe they really did believe it was real. Maybe it really did seem real to them. Maybe they were convinced, but just because they were convinced and just because they were persecuted does not mean they were verified in fact.
We don't have a situation of the northern lights, sir. In 1 John chapter 1, the Apostle John writes, that which we've seen, that which we've heard, that which we have handled with our own hands, this Jesus we're proclaiming to you. It is a clear historical claim. We were eyewitnesses. We ate food with him. We heard him teach. We watched him die on a cross. And 3 days later, we saw him risen from the dead. And our buddy Thomas didn't believe us when we told him. And our buddy Thomas said, not unless I can see him with my own eyes, not unless I can take my hands and put the nail prints in his hands, will I believe. And suddenly Jesus stood there, walked up to Thomas and said, my man, right here, take your hands and put them in the nail prints in my hands, take your hand and thrust in the spear wound in my side, and Thomas stopped doubting and believed. So, sir, that's an incredible eyewitness claim. They are either lying through their teeth or they're speaking the truth. The northern lights ain't got a thing to do with this. Seeing signs in the sky ain't got a thing to do with this. Having a feeling inside that might be indigestion that I call encountering God has nothing to do with this. This has to do with we saw him, we put our hands and the nail prints in his hands, we talked with him, we ate food with him, this Jesus rose from the dead. That's the claim. They're either lying through their teeth or they're speaking the truth. If they're speaking the truth, it's the most important message in the world today. That God really does love you, that there really is life after death, and that if you put your faith in Jesus Christ, he gives it to you as a gift. You don't want to look a gift horse in the face too many times and say no. That's not a good move.
Just want to know what happened to those people who don't go to heaven, and like about maybe people who haven't heard Jesus' message like we have, or stuff like that.
Okay, good question. I got to divide your excellent question into two parts. First part is, what about those who've never had the opportunity to hear about Christ? How is God going to judge them? I do not know. Why? Because obviously Jesus never answers the question.
Yeah.
And for me to pose like I can fill in the blank is absurd. Right, but Jesus and the Bible make 5 points that apply to your excellent question. First point, God is just, right? Jesus pounds that point home. God is just. Now, you guys really got to think about that, okay? Because one gentleman out here just earlier today was saying, I think everything's relative, right? And what I want you to ask yourself is, the American Bar Association is comprised of a lot of lawyers. It's the biggest volunteer organization in the world, I think. Something like 400,000, or it's big. Now, if a lawyer in a court of law begins to notice that a judge is discriminating, is prejudiced, they are allowed to file a legal complaint. You see, deeply rooted within you and me is an understanding of justice. And my point is, that's one of the biggest pieces of evidence that God exists. You and I understand that morality is not all relative. A lot of morality is relative, but there are a few moral absolutes. Isn't that why this guy's in the armed forces? You have an understanding of justice, I would presume, right? And you're committed to honor, duty, loyalty, promoting justice, right? And I respect you for that. Okay, but are those real? Or are those just an American bias, which would be horrible? If we're hiring him to go out and kill people to promote American bias, that would be horrible. But if we are saying, sir, we're asking you to defend our country and to promote justice, not to kill someone to keep gas prices low at the pub, but instead to stop the slaughter of innocent people. See, then we're on holy ground, I'm convinced. Then we're in touch with reality. All right, now what Jesus insists is God is just, which means nobody's going to get ripped off. Second point, Jesus insists the only reason people go to hell is because they choose to live their lives separate from God. And on the day of judgment, God simply grants their request. All right? Third point, nobody goes to hell because of ignorance. Nobody goes to hell because they didn't hear about Jesus, that's for sure. The only reason people go to hell is because they flip God off, and God says, fine, I respect your free will. I gave you free will in the first place. You want me to stay out of your life? I'm stepping back. I'm out of your life. Not only that, the Bible insists there are going to be a lot of people in heaven who never heard the word Jesus. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rahab, a Gentile prostitute. Obviously, they never heard about Jesus. They were born hundreds of years before him. But in humility, they put their faith in God. They're going to be in heaven. And finally, Christ insisted that the only reason anybody's going to be in heaven is because he bled and died on a cross. No one's, as you and I talked about, no one's going to be in heaven because they were a good old boy. Because good old boys, like me, are sinners. And we need God's forgiveness, his grace. And that's what Christ offers us through the cross. Okay, so ultimately, I do not know how God will judge those who've never heard about Christ. I do know it will be fair and just. I do know there are going to be a truckload of people in heaven who never heard about Christ. But I also know that the only way to heaven is through the death of Christ, where he sacrifices his life to take the hit that we deserve for our wrongdoing. Now, what about those who have heard about Christ? Reject him. Well, Christ is really clear on that. If you reject Jesus, you're rejecting God. If you reject Jesus, secondly, not only are you rejecting God, but you are rejecting the vehicle through which God offers you forgiveness and eternal life. His Son Christ, who died on a cross for our sin. So if I reject Christ, I have to answer to God for the wrong that I have done. I have to pay for the wrong that I have done. I will go to hell. Not because God wants me to go to hell. He wants me to go to heaven. That's why he sent his Son Christ. I will go to hell for one reason. Because I want to. In other words, I think I know the theme song of hell. The theme song of hell will be, I did it my way. It's the only reason people go to hell. I did it my way, and God says, fine, you can do it your way for eternity.